Tēnā tātou katoa, hui hui nei, tēnei wā. Welcome to the fourth of our webinars, which is the final webinar in our series on teaching concepts that are going to help you teach health and physical education in your school. My name's Alan Ovens, and I'm the Discipline Leader of Sport, Health and Physical Education at the University of Auckland. And I'm really pleased to be joined today by Marisa Mckay from Physical Education New Zealand. We're really looking forward to being able to take you through this little workshop on making games educational, which is really focused on the Movewell resource and how you might use that in your teaching. We both are sure that there's something here tonight that will give you some ideas on how to use the resource and to be able to build your physical education program, in particular around a games-based approach. Before we start, I'd just like to map out a couple of little rules. The first is, if you've got any questions, please put them in the Q&A box. We'll come back to those at the end. We're aiming to go for around about 40 minutes or so, and then give us a little bit of time at the end to answer any questions. So if you've got the questions in the Q&A box, that would be really good. And then if you want to follow up anything, the webinar is being recorded, and we'll be able to send that link out to you, but also feel free to contact either Marisa or myself, and we'd be very happy to answer any questions that you might have about the resource. So let's get started.
Well, it's really nice to have you all here this afternoon. So I guess the first key question we want to ask you to get you interacting with us rather than just staring at the screen is to have a think about what is your favourite game that you play with your students. So when you have a bit of spare time or you have the freedom to choose what you want to play, what is your go-to game that you play with your students that you ensure that the students are getting some fun and enjoyment out of it, but actually it's one of your favourites as well? So feel free to just pop them in the chat box and let us know.
We'll get one more game up. What else? The little ones rob the nest. All right, Foursquare. Okay, here we go, Alex. Hi, Alex, how are you? Danish longboard, the striking field games. Okay, very cool. All right, so that's good. Now we got our ideas working there. So let's start to move on. If I can get just to actually move on. So let us introduce ourselves. So as I said at the start, my name's Alan Ovens. I'm Associate Professor in Health and Physical Education at the University of Auckland. And the webinars that we've been hosting have come out of our research unit, the Richard Tinning Research Unit. And one of the joys that I had over the last few years was writing the Movewell resource. So it's going to be a real pleasure to be able to share some of those ideas with you today.
And kia ora, I'm Marisa Mckay. So I am from Physical Education New Zealand, and I am their primary and intermediate advisor. So my role is around supporting primary and intermediate schools with their physical education programs. I am a primary teacher by trade and taught for 13 years in primary schools, but I have spent the last 7 years working in the professional development space of physical education and really enjoy it. And I too have had the joy of being able to run workshops nationally over the last 6 or 7 months around Movewell. So have become very familiar with the work in the book and just how valuable a resource it is.
And as we get going, I need to just acknowledge a few other people, in particular, Wayne Smith and Margot Bowes, who were the co-writers on the Movewell resource. It really does reflect their expertise in the field. Need to acknowledge Karen Laurie from Sport New Zealand and also Sport New Zealand support for the development of the Movewell resource. It was wonderful to be able to work with Karen and be able to share those ideas and get her input as well. We had a group of consultants, and we were able to look at developing drafts and feedback. So we've, need to acknowledge people like Susie Stevens, Ian Colpin, and also Quinton Harvey, who ran our user testing with teachers so that we could fine-tune the resource to what teachers' needs were and really use their feedback. And we also want to acknowledge the expertise that is in New Zealand, and people like Dennis Slade and his wonderful book, Transforming Play, which was a real basis for a lot of the ideas that we put into the Movewell resource. And that's just, just a sprinkling of the people and the ideas that we're able to bring together into the resource.
So let's just nut out what we're here for today. So the webinar is really going to focus on some key aspects for the afternoon in terms of really identifying ways that we can make games more educational and not expect them to be educational because we're playing them, but how do we do that as teachers and professionals? And that's where we're going to bring in the Movewell resource and really understand how that can support you in that process. And then hopefully throughout the webinar, you'll develop some familiarity with the Movewell resource and be able to walk away and start using it and playing with it if you haven't started already. So coming back to some of those games that you shared with us earlier, and if you haven't shared but you've been thinking about them, hold on to those games. I'd like you to have a little think about what are all of the skills that can be developed through the game that you have identified as your favourite game or your kid's favourite game. There will be some really obvious ones that will be your go-to, but start having a think about what are some of the broader skills that may also be able to be developed in there and through their play and through their interaction with the game that is going on. So just have a little think about how wide the skills are that could be developed in the game that you've picked. I'll let you sit on those ones and ponder those. I won't ask you to throw your ideas out into the atmosphere at the moment, but we'll just get the ball, the brain's thinking and the ball spinning.
Okay, so that's a really good point about, what are we trying to do when we're structuring some games as part of our physical education program. So one of the things, or a good starting point here, is to think about how do we structure a physical education lesson? And we often talk about this notion of a traditional approach, and it's very common to see people perhaps fit into this broad pattern that we warm the class up somehow, getting them to run around the paddock or the gymnasium, stretch out a little wee bit, then we introduce a new skill. It might be, a little idea about this is how we pass a ball, or this is maybe how we kick a ball. And then we set up a practice situation for it, maybe in a drill of some sort, a nice little activity. And then if we've got time, we'll play a game at the end. Now, there are two key things to focus in on this. One is that the way we're practicing the skill, which is perhaps practicing it out of a game context, in that we might be drilling it in some particular way. And then the last thing, that playing the game at the end. Now, the idea here is the game is kind of like being used as a reward in this situation. And so in the Movewell resource, what we're suggesting is we're moving to a games-based approach, i.e. we're starting to see the game not as a reward that we play at the end, but actually as the tool with which we're going to be able to teach through. And so that's the idea. We're moving towards a games-based approach. Now, we're talking about the Movewell resource, and just to backtrack a little wee bit, the Movewell resource is a resource which has been written for teachers and coaches. It has a large collection of activities in it, and it's based on a games-based approach to coaching and teaching. Now, if you haven't got a copy of it, you can Google the Movewell resource, and you can download it from either the PENS website or the Sport New Zealand website, and it's available from both. And also there are hard copies which have been circulated to all New Zealand primary and intermediate schools. So if you haven't seen it on the staff room table, or it's not in the library, somebody's smuggled it away and has probably got it at home and working through it. So you could raise it in the staff meeting to say, hey, where's our Movewell resource? Because there's 3 copies there somewhere. So that's what we're talking about there. It is, as a games-based approach, it's based on a number of core principles. And these are quickly laid out here, and we're going to work through these a little wee bit. So the starting point is that the importance of playing games. And then the second principle is about how do we design game contexts and the importance of game context and focusing more on that. Third principle is around using good pedagogy. Fourth principle is the importance of fostering personal, social, and cultural identity. And the fifth one is being able to develop game playing abilities. So let's start with that very first principle.
Just before, can we just go back a slide, Alan?
Yep,
the,
sure.
the really nice thing about this image here in terms of the principles is that principle number 1 about playing games is where is pivotal and is where the kids need to get involved. And then as the arrows flow on, the expectation then becomes that of the teacher. So it's the teacher's responsibility to design those contexts, to use good pedagogy, to have to inclusive practice, and to develop that game ability. And so the arrows really allow for that to show through in terms of we must play the games, but actually there's a responsibility as a professional here to make sure that that is a successful game. So having a little chat about the first principle here, as I said, playing games, this is really pivotal. If we don't allow our kids the opportunity and the access to play the games, then it's very difficult for us to be able to then support the learning and the development behind it. So play is number 1, and we really want that to be fun for the kids. We want that to be a positive experience, something that they have enjoyed, that they feel that they can connect to, so that they have a sense of belonging and want to participate again and again in a multitude of games and a multitude of opportunities. So it's really about throwing them into it and getting them involved and making sure that the games are happening so that you as a teacher can then facilitate the learning from that situation. And there's a lovely little quote that kind of just backs that up there. So we want them to be able to make those decisions by being in situations where they have the opportunity to do that, rather than being directed by a teacher. And the same goes for play. We want them to be able to learn through the experience, not by being told from a teacher what that experience could be or should be like.
The second principle is about designing the game context. And as Marisa has said, it's flowing into this becomes the teacher's responsibility. The notion of designing the game context is throwing the emphasis on both design and also realizing the importance of the environment that learning is taking place in. And it's the idea that, when children learn to swim, they learn to swim in water. And if they're learning to skateboard, they learn to skateboard by riding skateboards and things like that. So you learn games by participating in games. And they do that when they are supported by a socially inclusive and social environment. So the idea is to design the environment which is going to invite students to be able to participate and in a broad variety of activities. They need a variety of game experiences that challenge them and provide them with opportunities to develop emotionally, physically, socially, and in safe ways. And this doesn't mean just designing adult versions of games. The idea is to modify games to be able to match the interest level and the ability level of the children that you're working with. So you can enhance the experience by setting up well-designed games that encourage children to inquire and challenge themselves through the play. Now, one of the ways, and this is one of the ideas, so we've said modify and don't be afraid to change the nature of the game. We're not playing an adult version of the game, but you're modifying the game to be able to match that, the interest of the level of the students, and especially their ability level and playing ability. And so this idea of reshaping games is a nice way of thinking about the different ways that we can modify games. Reshape just stands for we can change the rules of a game. We've got equipment, we can vary, we can use different amount of equipment, different sorts of equipment. We can change the scoring on things, so we can give more points for certain things, and for doing certain things in the game. We can alter the scoring that way. We can change the duration of how long things take place. We can change the playing area that the game takes place in. And a really good example of that is when you go out to play, say, a game of football. You don't have to play across or down the whole field. You might want to play across the field, or you might want to be able to create smaller grids that the students are playing in. We can change, for instance, the last one, the P is the notion of players, the amount of players. And remember, you don't have to play with the same number of players on each side of the team. You can vary that. So you can have 3-on-2. You can have those changing ratios of players, and that creates different dynamics in the game. And the last thing there is the extra elements that you might want to bring in. You might want to bring in a cultural element. It might be a particular game from a particular country that you want to be able to bring in trial. So you don't have to always teach, a very standard traditional style game. So that's the idea of these modifying it. The very first part here is designing a game context. And you've got these tools that you can play around with in your planning.
So principle number 3 is around using good pedagogy. And from my experience with primary and intermediate teachers, they have extremely good pedagogy within the classroom and across a number of learning areas. And the challenge often becomes, how do I apply that good pedagogy when I'm using and when I'm teaching physical education? And so these ideas around good pedagogy won't be anything new, but sometimes we need some support or prompting around, actually, how can I use that in physical education? So when we're talking about good pedagogy, we are talking about simple things around some really good quality teaching practices, which we'll hit on in the next slide in just a minute. But we're also talking about things like the inquiry cycle, which can sometimes be a challenge around how do we connect that with our physical education learning. But when we start to look at our learners and their needs, and we choose games that are appropriate and design them in that way, the inquiry cycle actually is a really good foundation and a really good support for that learning. One neat little catchphrase that has comes through in Movewell that a lot of teachers seem to pick up on is the leave me, watch me, help me. So it's about offering our students these games and giving them the opportunity to play, and to leave them and let them play and see what's happening and give them some time. Your role then as a teacher is to watch what's happening and identify where are the areas that the students need support, what's happening here, and what learning can I help with? And then as a teacher, to step in and help and facilitate some of that learning. And if you've got a number of groups, then that learning might look different across the groups that you're working in, so it might not look exactly the same. On the next slide, we've got some really common quality teaching practices that you'll be really familiar with, so I'm not going to preach about them, but it's about drawing attention to these and thinking about How do they look when we are teaching physical education? So again, we want to give the kids lots of time to play. And through that, we want to be able to give them some agency over the game. And that includes asking the kids some of those questions about, okay, how are we going to reshape this game? What kind of size field should we be using? How many players do we want here? What equipment do we want to use today? And so it's not about giving the students a complete free-for-all, but it's about structuring and allowing them to have some agency in that game. Making sure that our questions are rich, as we do in other learning areas, and are really directed towards that learning, and allowing the students the time to reflect on those and then put some of those reflections back into action. Sometimes we cut them off a little bit too early and they give us some ideas, but we don't often allow them the time to follow up with that.
I think one of the things that we often see is that the wonderful pedagogy that teachers use inside the classroom is not always transferred out. So I'll just reinforce and support Marisa's point there, is that many of the things that you're doing inside the classroom with other subject areas can be applied outside as well. We don't have to go back into that traditional style of planning a phys ed lesson, but it is about empowering young people and using those ideas of being able to question them and give them a sense of agency over their own engagement in that in the games. The fourth principle is there to once again a bit of a challenge to be able to say we're playing games because they just provide the most wonderful context for teaching young people. And in teaching young people, we can foster the personal, social, and their cultural identities and competencies. So it's not always about developing their physical skills, but it's being able to take them outside and provide the opportunity for them to learn about their own personal skills, about the ability to set goals, to be able to give things a go, to be able to, in terms of social, to be able to learn to work with other people, to problem solve problems, to be able to know how to support and communicate with those people around them. And in terms of cultural competencies, to be able to learn about different games and about different cultures and different values and different belief systems. So games provide a really valuable opportunity, learning opportunities in that sense.
And what we want at the end of the day for this is for all of our students to feel like they have a place in a physical education lesson. So we want to make sure that our practice is inclusive and that it's not just directed towards the physically skillful students, but that we are actually making these opportunities and this learning available for all of our students, just in the same way that when we do reading, it's for all of our students. When we do writing, it's for all of our students. Physical education is the same. One of the key points that through our workshops that was really highlighted and picked up by teachers was around this idea of equity. And that means that the way that we approach some of this teaching within our physical education lessons, that it actually ends up looking a bit different. So it's not about being inclusive and providing everyone with the exact same opportunity, as we can see at the top in terms of equality. That doesn't always fit, but it's about being thoughtful and purposeful and explicit around actually how am I going to cater my learning and make sure that I am delivering to all of my students in my class. And what will that look like? And obviously we deliver a similar opportunity, but it may need to be manipulated and shaped in a different way, depending on the students that are within your class, which again is no different to what you would do for the writers in your class and make sure that everybody has access to that, or when you are doing numeracy, that everybody has access to that learning as well.
The last principle is about developing their playing ability. And we place this one at the end quite deliberately because the other ideas that preceded this, the other principles, are what we need to put in place first. And developing the skill level of young people is not the priority in what we're trying to do here. Although developing their game playing ability is important. What we see is that games are an excellent medium for teaching a broad range of game skills, and with the aim of developing their competence and their confidence and motivation to be able to continue playing games. So we want to build their a sense of belonging, that this is, I feel comfortable playing games, and that I like and I want to play games. In the resource itself, we use a more encompassing definition of skill that has then previously been sort of discussed, I suppose, as an everyday sort of understanding of skill. We've tried to move that idea on a little wee bit. Researchers today recognize skill as involving a much broader range of things, including the ability to read a situation, the ability to have some technical proficiency, the ability to adapt to situations, and to effect a successful outcome. Thinking in this way implies two key ideas. The first, it recognizes, as I said before, how important the context is for learning, because learning in context in a game-like situation preserves all the environmental and game-like features which are really critical to be able to learn to be skillful. And secondly, skill emerges as the performer encounters the types of problems that they get in a game situation. So skill is really the ability to solve a game problem or a movement problem that's presented at them. And so they have to be able to engage with authentic problems. And game settings are able to present those. In other words, games provide real problems and situations that children can work at as they play. And that's counter to the idea that they learn in isolation. What we're saying here is they need to be able to learn in context.
So as Alan's mentioned, when we talk about skill, typically we automatically go to thinking about movement skills. So when you were thinking about your favorite game earlier and potentially thinking about the skills that were developed there, I'm sure that you would have listed a whole bunch of physical movement-based skills such as throwing and jumping and skipping and all those kinds of things that game could have developed. In terms of looking at the Movewell resource, and when we are considering what the physical education curriculum itself is talking about, we want to think about skills in a far more holistic manner. So we want to think about actually which games here are going to support some social skill development because that's what my students need, or which skills are going to talk about strategic play. I've really worked out that my students are not very aware of what strategies that they could be using. These are just a few different skill definitions here, but there are other ways that we can support that too through personal skills or other skills as well. So it's really about thinking far more broadly in that term. And what we do know is that movement and physical education are the only places where the students are going to get that specific opportunity to learn about movement. So it's really important, but it is not the only important factor that we should be using to support and guide our teaching and learning. And when we look at the curriculum and the strands and the achievement objectives, it actually covers a huge range of skills beyond just movement, and it's around acknowledging and balancing some of that learning and development.
So if we take a little diversion off here to just to recap once again. So what we're suggesting here is a rethinking of the concept of skill away from just a focus, an internal focus on movement, competency, and actions, to a far more comprehensive idea. And as we've tried to suggest here, the notion of skill is a little bit more broad and it's distributed across a team, and it's related to how maybe you're able to work competently within this particular context. Skill involves a variety of different things, like your ability to, say, read the play and be perceptive to the environment. It includes that understanding strategy and tactics and what is it that we're trying to do. So if you think in terms of, you know, how we might pass a ball, passing a ball is more than just an action. It also implies that we've seen the opportunity to pass the ball and strategically it's the right thing to do. Skill also involves technique, obviously, and there's a nice debate around, you know, how much teaching of technique we should do. But there is the idea of there's some technical proficiency in skill. But at the same time, we're not stuck to just a movement, a technique, and without being able to adapt. And because the top most skillful people are very creative in the way they perform in action. And lastly, really good players seem to be able to effect a really nice outcome. They'd be able to always be on the spot at the right time, be creative, and get the job done. So in terms of rethinking skill, you know, it's quite a broad concept. And so it's not about, when we're trying to develop somebody's skillfulness, it's not about learning some pre-programmed movement patterns, but it's about being able to learn it in context, being able to conceive, perceive, and move within an open, semi-structured environment, which is providing the types of problems that the player has to be able to solve in the situation in the most effective way. So when we talk about skill, that's what we're thinking about, sort of rethinking that concept away from just a set of perhaps actions and movement patterns to a much broader concept. So when you look at the Movewell resource, one of the things that you'll notice then is when we're talking about skills, we're not talking about the ideas of, say, catching a ball or jumping or being able to run. We're talking about those situated solutions to the types of problems that a game presents. And so it's here, for instance, we've just got the type of thing that you'll see in the Movewell resource. So there are some, when we're thinking about invasion games, for instance, we start with the idea that the tag games are important. And what are the type of skills that tag games will develop, or you should be developing through tag games? Things like being able to chase and shadow, to evade, to shepherd, to corner, to move into space. And so those are the skills that you're focusing in on and creating games to try and teach those particular skills. What we've done in the Movewell resource is to be able to identify those skills and also provide a definition of what they are, and also provide some success criteria. So when your young people are running around, you can see the success criteria when they're actually have learned or performing that particular skill. One of the things about a games-based approach is that skills are quite context specific. And so what has happened is that games that are similar in their technical complexity or their tactics tend to be categorized together, because our skill can transfer within a game category, but not necessarily between categories. So therefore, thinking about how we categorize games so that we can learn the skills within that category and they can be transferred across all the games in that category become important. What we've done in the Movewell resource is identify 6 different categories. So when you look there, the games are organized around striking games, invasion and territory games, net war games, target games. We've introduced cooperative games and also challenge games. And each one of those categories provides unique opportunities to develop different types and forms of skill.
So the structure of Movewell has been really well thought out, and each game section has something called a skills matrix. And this is really to support teachers in terms of what learning they can provide, how can we make these games educational, and what things can we focus on. And so this is an example of the cooperative game section. And what you'll find is that on the left-hand side, it has identified a number of game skills that can be developed throughout those games that relate to cooperative games. And then they are explained, so those skills are explained, and then they are also further explained in terms of identifying what that looks like for students and the success criteria. What you'll find here in the cooperative section is actually we talk about communication skills, but they've been really explicit about those, and we're not just lumping communication skills together and expecting our kids to talk and listen and work that out, but we're actually talking about specific communication skills like assertiveness. Again, with the decision-making skills, they've been broken down and they are explicit as well. What's really important to note here is that these skills may very well be played out through other games in other sections of the book. So you don't have to isolate them just to cooperative games. You may find a really good striking and fielding game that relies on students' negotiation. And so you may use the information from this section of the book, but you may play a game from a different section of the book. And the book allows for you to manipulate it in that way. They've also got another matrix page. The next one is around the games matrices. So every section has its own games matrix, which is very similar to a contents page, really. So you can go through and have a quick look at all of the games that are available in that section. What is really valuable about this is that you get a little breakdown of what the game is about, but then you can also automatically see what that game has chosen to focus on. So if we are looking at noughts and crosses, we can see that this one has been identified around developing the skills of accuracy and blocking. Now, it's not to say that the only skill in noughts and crosses is accuracy and blocking and that you won't develop anything else. And in the same vein, it's not to say that you can't use the information about accuracy and blocking from noughts and crosses to play somewhere else. But what they have done is in noughts and crosses made it really explicit that this is how we can develop accuracy and blocking. And then you'll find some information on the games page that will support you as a teacher to develop the learning with your students.
So in the resource, you'll find a number of games, and this is a typical game card. So on the front of it, you've got the name of the game, a picture of perhaps some kids playing it, the learning focus, and how you're going to set it up and play it. So it's the basic rules there, and the equipment you're going to need to be able to play that game. Now, like all good teachers, just because you've got the list of the equipment there, you can always modify. If you don't have, say, the kicking tees there, that you can just grab something else. It's not absolutely critical that you've got the exact equipment, but if you've got that equipment, then it's there and you can grab that. So that's on the front of the card. On the back of the card, then you've got a better explanation of perhaps how you're going to play that game, some progressions of how you can advance the game as the students are getting comfortable with the game, and you want to make it a little bit more, progress it on a little wee bit. There is a list of questions there that you want to focus the students on particular aspects, and there's also questions that you can use to structure your own reflection after the game is finished. And as Marisa has said there's also on every card a concept clinic, what we've called the concept clinic, but a basic concept which might relate to this particular game, but it can relate to a number of different ideas. So as the students are playing this game, you might want to be able to talk to them about what is a zone defense, and then maybe how would you attack a zone defense through that questioning and getting students to problem solve and experiment with different ideas. And perhaps some of the background to how you might do that is provided in the concept clinic. As you read through the Movewell resource, you'll see lots and lots of different concepts there, and it's quite a useful way to develop your own understanding of some of the concepts that you're developing or the skills that you're developing through all the games.
So when we get to this point, the question is, okay, so I see how Movewell all fits together, but where on earth do I start with this? And it's very easy to fall into what we usually do with the resource, and we flick to the game section and we pick a bunch of games to play, and off we go. But what we do know is that the spiral of inquiry is a very effective way of teaching and learning, and has really positive and greater outcomes with our students. Sometimes we don't actually see how that fits into a physical education context when we haven't used those games in an educational way, perhaps to the maximum as they could be used. So what the writers here have done, Alan and co, have really cleverly adapted the spiral by Timperley and her mates, and used that specifically around what that could look like with Movewell and in physical education. So the first place we start, as we do with other areas, is around scanning and looking at our students and working out what are their needs, what's happening for my kids at the moment, what do they need support with, and where do I establish my learning. From there we go and we focus in on what's going to make the most difference. We can't possibly be able to cater to 32 needs within a classroom. So we look at focusing and thinking, yeah, where am I going to make the most impact? What's going to be the most important thing to hit home with here? From there, we go into developing a hunch and having a think about, okay, from here, I've decided on this learning focus, but what do I think is happening behind that? What do I need to do as a teacher, as we've talked about? How are you going to design and manipulate and construct these learning situations for your students to make sure they have access to the learning that they need? Of course, there is the learning phase there where we want our students to play those games, to have access to the learning, to be able to interact with that, to have some agency, and to really work out what's going on. And your role as a teacher really is around asking those questions and pushing those students and allowing them the ability to make those changes and manipulations and have some agency there. All the while we are taking action as teachers around, okay, so how are things going here? What do we need to do differently to make sure that we are on track? How can I support my learners here? And that's where the progressions come in as a really helpful way, which is they're really unique to Movewell. I haven't seen another resource in particular that will offer a range of ways to play those games. And while there are 3 progressions for most of those games, they're not the only progressions. They are just some suggested ones. There will be ways to further simplify those games, and there'll be ways to further extend those games as well. So don't feel like what's in the book is the only way to do those, but we revisit what's happening during that learning situation. And then, just as we do in other areas of our teaching and learning, we check at the end. Have my students had the opportunity to learn what we wanted them to learn, what we identified there? Did I give them enough support? Did I give them enough opportunity to experience that? Do we need to continue with this learning, or have I identified something new that's come up through this learning that we now need to focus on? And that's where the spiral begins again. So from here, what I would like to do is just to put out a couple of questions around how we can make these games a little bit more educational. So just to start with, we're going to have a look at level 1, and that's our very early beginners, learners, so our new entrants, our year 1, our year 2 students. If we had gone through that spiral of inquiry process and we had decided, actually, my students need support with learning to cooperate and share, as a teacher, which of these games or contexts that you can see over here are going to be the best opportunities for them to develop the ability to cooperate and share? Which games are going to provide the best educational opportunities for that? Feel free to pop your answers in the chat box in terms of what ones you think are going to match up the best there. Hopefully I haven't made that too hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Nikki. Yeah, so if we are thinking about contexts where our kids have to cooperate and share, we're thinking about those playground gamed opportunities and those cooperative games. If we are thinking about things like cross country, in its true form, it's very much an individual activity in terms of what's happening and can be quite competitive. It is not to say that we can't manipulate cross country and work it into a cooperative situation, but in its natural form, it's not really going to lend to that learning as well as some of the other ones will. Okay, let's have a look at level 4. So we'll go up to our year 7 and 8. And if we have identified some learning around connecting to the inquiry here around cultural traditions, so we know that our students through social studies, through writing, through English, they are looking at cultural traditions. In terms of being able to connect that to physical education, which of these game contexts are going to be the best to support the learning in terms of cultural traditions? Again, it's hopefully not a trick question. Bryony's onto it. So yeah, having a look at the games around Te Aukore and looking at games for different cultures is a great way to unsilo physical education and actually bring it in and integrate it into the other rich learning that's going on within their teaching and learning programs, which means the students will get a real depth of understanding around cultural traditions rather than having a little bit of learning around cultural traditions here, but then when I go to physical education, we are doing athletics because it's term 4. And that allows for simplicity in terms of you as a teacher to keep the same messages coming across, but also for our students, they're not having to change hats across the day and again can get that depth of learning. All right, we're just going to do one more of these. And we're heading to level 3, so we're talking about our year 5s and 6s here. If you had identified the fact that our year 5s and 6s were dealing with the effects of competitive activities, and so we're talking about some of the pressures of being in a competitive situation and how students react to that, what would some really good contexts around competitive activities be that would put our students in those situations to experience that, to be able to talk and learn about it? This one's pushing the boat out a little bit more. Yeah, so we could use some challenge games. What else could we use? It doesn't have to be from Movewell. What are some other contexts and where we put our students into these competitive activities? Yeah, team games is great. A lot of our sporting codes are naturally competitive activities, so it'd be a great time to bring in looking at rugby or looking at football or looking at hockey and having an experience there. And it doesn't mean that we have to spend the whole term on rugby, but actually we might look across some of these challenge games, some invasion games, some of these sports codes, and again, reshape and manipulate that to be able to meet the needs of our students. Thanks for throwing your answers in there.
Mm.
At the end of the day, what we want to achieve in physical education and through our educational games is not high performance sports players. As teachers, you are not coaches. That is not your role in physical education, but it is your role to develop your students' well-being, to give them a sense of self-worth, and to encourage their ability to be active and to want to continue to be active throughout their lives. And if by chance they then become a really skillful player and choose to pursue that and take that to all sorts of high performance levels, then that's a fantastic opportunity you've provided. But it's not your number one outcome. We want to be providing those students with opportunities to become holistic and well-situated students and citizens that can go out and interact with the world with a sense of self.
All right, lovely. And I can add there, I suppose the most valuable thing in young people is to develop that repertoire of I cans and I belong here. So, you know, I can do this, I can kick a ball, I can participate, I enjoy playing in a game, and I want to play in a game. I know how to participate and be a productive member of a team. So those are really important outcomes. So we're in this phase now. We're really lucky to have some time left. If people have got any questions, if you want to put them in the Q&A box, we'll be able to respond. And while you're thinking of some questions, I might pitch one to Marisa, because she's got a lot of experience, obviously, over the last 8 months of working with teachers. Marisa, are there some particular ideas that you think that teachers connect to first with this, which are really valuable to sort of emphasize?
So I guess what I find from teachers is that they are asking for support with game ideas. And what's really unique about this is that they have access to a whole bunch and a whole range of games that previously have maybe been situated in a number of places. And so this has really brought it together. The fact that it's New Zealand based is really appealing. But Movewell goes further than just providing the games, and it provides so much more of that support behind what those games mean and how they can be effective and how we can be explicit about the teaching and learning in there. And so that makes it really valuable and just beyond a games resource, which teachers are so commonly trying to access more games and broaden my horizon, so I don't just play my one favorite game for the next, little while.
Okay, and there's a question here about are there any workshops that secondary school teachers could attend? I know PENS has considered this.
Yeah, so at the moment, the resource was primarily developed for primary and intermediate teachers. So that's where our focus has been. We haven't got anything booked in or scheduled at the moment specific to secondary school teachers. I was to lead a session at the recent conference, and unfortunately came down unwell, so wasn't able to provide that for secondary teachers. So it is something that we will consider, but there isn't anything confirmed in the pipeline just at this stage.
And Jason, if you contact me, I know that this has been one of the questions from secondary school, and I would be very happy to put together a workshop for teachers. So if that'll help, just drop me a line at the university and we can explore how we're going to do that with your school. And I know, in addition to that, there is the Easy Peasy Phys Ed workshop that Auckland Physical Education is putting together, or the Auckland branch of PENS is putting together. I think it's in November, which is once again aimed at primary school teachers. But if you're a primary school teacher and you haven't had an opportunity to attend one of the workshops so far, then that is a possibility.
Yeah, and just on that too, Physical Education New Zealand and the Health Education Association and EONS have been running some primary webinars over the last 2 terms. And there are recordings of sessions around Movewell as well through there. So if you wanted to access those, you can flick me an email and I'm really happy to send you the link there for an online webinar.
All right, well, the last thing from me really is that the Movewell resource has been developed as an extension and an evolution of the fundamental movement booklet that many schools have got. And one of the reasons that we've spent a little bit of time talking about the philosophy is that there are some really wonderful and really good games in the fundamental movement booklet, but the philosophy around how that is used has changed. So it's not a matter of, say, picking up the fundamental movement skills booklet and saying, okay, this is no longer relevant, but it's just a matter of knowing that we don't think in terms of developing fundamental movement skills anymore, but we're developing those game skills and the ability to participate and seeing the potential in games as being much, much broader than just, say, some isolated abilities to move in a particular way. Well, we've almost run out of time, and I just really like to thank Marisa for adding her expertise to this, the workshop, the webinar tonight. It's been really wonderful to work with her to be able to focus this in on the work that primary school teachers are doing. And I hope that there has been some ideas there that you'll be able to find it useful, and you'll be able to dig out the resource from the school and be able to use it in developing your own health and PE programs. Marisa, I'll hand the last word over to you.
Oh, just thank you for your time and making some time to attend tonight and to hopefully take away some ideas. As Ellen has mentioned, both Ellen and I are very happy to be contacted. You can contact me through the Physical Education New Zealand website, so pop on there and my email details are there, and I know that Ellen is the same. If you have any questions or queries about it, very happy to be contacted and to follow up and support you with that.
Excellent. Thank you. And have a very good rest of the evening, people. And we'll see you perhaps next year for the next round of webinars.
Kia ora, ka kite.
Ka kite.